flower friends, welcome back to another episode of the Field and Garden Podcast. It is your friend in flowers, Lisa Mason Ziegler, and super glad that you're dropping in here because, friends, I'm really sharing a special story today, and one that has become cornerstone of my flower farm. And so I hope that you're going to take away from this something that will help you, whether you're, a home gardener or a flower farmer, or no matter what you're doing, anybody that owns a spot of land, no matter how big or small, incorporating some of this into your plan will definitely benefit you and the rest of the world, right? So friends, if this is your first time dropping into the Field and Garden Podcast, welcome aboard. I have been a commercial cut flower farmer for over 25 years, and I'm now on this mission to help other people grow cut flowers, whether it's for profit or for pleasure. And particularly people like me that were like the most unlikely person to be able to do it. I never thought I could do it and did it anyway. And so everything we do at thegardenersworkshop.com, we do for you to help you in some way. We offer resources, we equip you, we provide you with seeds and the tools and supplies, and of course my books and online courses and just tons of free resources and very timely farm newsletters. And friends, I just invite you to all of it. And this is the perfect time of the year. I'm recording this in November as we're heading into winter, which means no harvesting. We're still doing work. It's just different work than what we do when we're in season, when we don't have anything to do but plant, cut, sell, all the things that flower farmers face, which looks different for all of us at different seasons of our life. And anyway, thegardenersworkshop.com can be home base to you if you want to learn to grow cut flowers and develop into something you never, ever, ever imagined. Now, if you listened to episode number 368, which was about why and how I use leaves in my garden and they're gold, I ended that episode saying something like, consider choosing your future trees with the leaves that they produce in mind. And I shared that I love willow oak trees absolute most, and it's because oak trees are one of the most, beneficial trees that you can actually plant in your garden or on your property, and they are just considered like a keystone species. And so I Googled that, and this is what it said. And I thought this is a great way for me just to tell you just how significant the choice of what you plant has such a far-reaching impact. So the answer, when I asked, how does an oak tree benefit the environment that it's growing in besides, just being a great old shade tree that produces leaves that I absolutely love, it said a single mature oak tree can support over 2,300 species, and some sources suggest it can support as many as 4,000 species of insects and animals. And these species rely on the oak for food and shelter, including hundreds of insects like caterpillars. Those are like many times baby butterflies, y'all. Numerous bird species, mammals, fungi, and lichens. And oaks are considered keystone species because they provide a foundation for a complex ecosystem. And there you have it, my friends. So today's episode, I wanted to share the story of my journey of learning about planting native plants and how it came to save my farm. So I'm calling this episode My Flower Farm's Halo. It literally encompasses my farm, and I believe has kept it what it is today in spite of what started happening here a little over a decade ago. So first I want to tell you that my introduction to native plants, I don't hope anybody ever has to go through the way that I had to learn about them. And so I'm just going to kind of jump into the story. I came to know that a big part of my flower farm's pest controls lived next door on what was then my neighboring 40-acre horse boarding farm. It was a 200-year-old farm, family held. It had pastures that were divided by hedgerows that had grown and developed for over a century. And these hedgerows, y'all, which up until they were really threatened, I knew they were there. I mean, I would go over and pick blackberries from them, but I never got the full meaning of what they were. They were golden, y'all. And I came to know and understand that those hedgerows were home base to all the good things, and I'm sure there were a few bad ones too, that the things that supported my flower farm, you know, the beneficial insects, the thousands and thousands of birds that ate tons of insects over here, to just name a few that were living there. When I gained an understanding through a really deep and even dark journey, y'all. I mean, it was so really, really tough. And I have often described the story as, other than losing my parents, was perhaps the hardest thing I've ever faced emotionally, you know? So what I came to know is that all the good stuff that lived in those hedgerows that were coming over here on my farm and taking care of business, if they survived the destruction that was about to come because the farm was going to be developed, which was totally out of everybody's hands, there was nothing to stop it, that if they survived the destruction, they were about to become homeless. I mean, when you start thinking about that, it's pretty amazing that wildlife really survives these days. So when the destruction of neighboring farm was imminent, I knew that I had to do something. I had to hop to it. And believe it or not, it all started to unfold when I was in the writing of Cool Flowers, which was like in 2012. The book was published in 2014. And I can remember sitting on my couch with my computer in my lap writing, and I sat in a spot where I looked out the side window of my house, which overlooked one of my gardens and that 40-acre horse boarding farm. I mean, literally pictures of horses grazing, literally, okay? So I was sitting there writing my first bits of Cool Flowers when I saw a surveying team walk across the field, and y'all, it stopped me dead in my tracks for probably 2 weeks. I couldn't think. It was pretty terrible. Anyway, it was imminent. And I knew that I needed to do something, and I better be hopping to it pretty fast. So during that same timeline, that's back when I was speaking, you know, doing 60 to 80 lectures a year, traveling all over Kingdom Come. And so I was speaking at a conference, and I met another one of the speakers, and her name was Denise Green. And Denise is I think she's retired now, a native plant landscape designer, and she was also a grower. She grew gobs of native plants and actually supplied, back then, many of the native plant sales that happened here on the peninsula. And I was intrigued by her program. I mean, that was kind of like right about the same time that all of this craziness next door was about to start. And so, you know, I was thinking to myself, should I be planting on my farm instead of just belly aching over what they were going to destroy next door? Was that what I was supposed to do? Am I supposed to, you know, plant native plants over here that we're losing over there, right? So long story short, I hired Denise to come and visit my little flower farm in the middle of the city. And she suggested that she and I go next door and walk the hedgerows and see what was growing over there in our efforts to kind of recreate not exactly what was growing over there, but I mean, she was spieling off, you know, that the sassafras tree is a hosting plant to a specific butterfly who I cannot remember the name of right now. It's a swallowtail, I think. And she said, you know, there really isn't much other hosting plants for them and that kind of stuff. She said, and what we can do is, even if we can't plant maybe that specific plant that's growing here, we can find comparable native plants that can support a lot of these native creatures. And she went to work, y'all. And up until this point, I had not planted anything around the perimeter of my flower farm because we didn't want to block that view. You know, our farm at that point had gone from 1.17 acres for the first 12 years of my flower farming life. Then we were able to acquire 1.5 acres of this adjoining horse boarding farm. Land in the city is very expensive, y'all. And that's about the biggest bite that we could actually take. But we never planted anything around the perimeter for a windbreak, which I really needed. But we didn't want to block our view. We knew the day was coming that we weren't going to have that view anymore, right? So up until then, we had nothing. So it was this picturesque view of literally horses grazing in the middle of the city. I mean, it was literally a visual fairy tale around here. And when people would come here, they would be speechless. They didn't know. Because when I say I'm in the middle of the city, people don't understand. I have houses up against me on all sides now. There are 200,000 people surrounding me, or homes surrounding me. So I want to just pause for just a minute, and I want to tell you another piece of this pie. And then I am going to tell you kind of my steps that I followed and give you maybe some food for thought. But first, I want to take you down something that I never realized. I mean, this was such a learning process for me when this all started to unfold. So part of what is so destructive to wildlife, beyond losing their actual, let's say, home base, when development happens and when people just start ripping out stuff and it removes habitat, right, is creatures lose their travel paths. You know, it's like, think about how you jump on the interstate and go somewhere. Imagine if all the interstates disappeared. Think about that for a minute. You know, all of the roadways, the main thoroughfares were all of a sudden bang gone. You couldn't go that way anymore. You know, it's how these hedgerows, and not hedges, but hedges basically, those are travel paths. They're cover. You know, they're a place for them to rest. It's a place for them to hide. It's a really, really big deal. And my goodness, from the moment that I learned that, I could not stop thinking about these hedgerows. And so while I was focusing on providing on my farm habitat for these creatures that live next door and were losing it all, right? I was still dismayed over how this one little piece I just couldn't let go of is, how are they going to get over here? Right? I mean, how are they going to make it from, so to give you a 30,000 foot view, if you went straight up above my house, the Warwick River is about 2,500 feet from my home. Okay, you can't see the river from me because in that 2,500 feet is a part of this neighborhood that was built next to me. And then there's a big pond that is surrounded with woods. And then on the other side of that is one row of houses along the river and then the river. Okay. And they were these creatures that come over here and hang out, whether it's beneficial insects or birds or whatever, would come across those pastures with hedgerows to stop in and eat and hide and rest and all that stuff. Were not going to be there anymore. You know? And so I just imagine from their perspective of going from having a 15-foot wide hedgerow, which is kind of a guesstimate, that ran for acres, y'all, full of native trees, shrubs, plants, a lot of the things that we call weeds, they don't call weeds. And those hedgerows divided that 40 acres up next door to me into these 5 to 7 acre pastures. So think about it from, let's just say, a bird's point of view. He's over there in the woodlands and he wants to come over this way. And he has all these stopping and hopping shopping places he can stop in. And now it's going to all be stripped down to subsoil, to nothing. 40 acres of it. It's horrible. And I can't even really verbalize the visual of that because it was so disturbing to watch unfold. So I knew that in addition to creating what I was trying to think of as utopia over here for all these creatures, I knew that I wanted, at least on my property, to create a travel path around the property to help provide. But, y'all, imagine my sheer surprise and the greatest gift that occurred during this horrific development process happen, that the housing developer would have to change their lot plans halfway through the project. And so that y'all have to understand that is like totally unheard of. They're already committed to this huge plan of, I think it was 90 houses. And then as they got to my side of the farm, the side of the farm that I bordered, they discovered a utility issue. And gosh, y'all, it was the best thing that ever, that was the high point of over like a 3-year period of going through this mess. So, and I learned about this because y'all know me, I'm a social butterfly. I had befriended the site workers over there, knowing that it wasn't their fault that this was happening. They're just guys going to work every day. And that was the only way that I was going to really be able to stay in tune with what was happening over there. So on one said day, I was standing at the fence talking to the head guy. I was actually, I think he was in charge. And I asked him, like, how many houses are going over there? Because I hadn't seen any official plans or anything like that. And he said, well, have you heard? And I'm like, heard what? That's all changed because of utility issues. And I said, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how much worse can it get, right? And he said, now this whole side of the development has changed. None of the houses are gonna, so how can I explain it? They're not, the houses that were gonna be running down my road, which was like 15 houses, I'll guess, their front yards were gonna be on my road. It was gonna be horrible instead of pasture and hedgerow, right? He said, now, because of our utility issue, we've lost some lots at the end of the street, and now the houses are going to be, your road is going to be the backyard. So we're not clearing off the roadside growth, which was one of the said old hedgerows, y'all. Oh my gosh. I made him repeat it to me again because I thought this can't be true. This is like, what a blessing, what a gift. How did this happen? And he explained it to me again. And in fact, yes, that all the houses were going to be, their backyards were going to be on my street. That meant that nobody was going to be driving down my street. My street doesn't have an entrance into these houses now where it did before. But more importantly, the hedgerow, which had been planted by the previous farming family, decades before, which is based in not native, but crepe myrtles and native cedar trees, and everything that's growing under them was not going to be removed. Oh my gosh, y'all. Do you know what else this meant? That line of, which we'll just call it a hedgerow, connected to that woodland that's over there around the pond. And it comes right up to my property. It's like the highway to heaven, y'all. I'm not kidding you. It was really pretty unbelievable. And so the wildlife travel path from that wooded pond area on the other side of the development from my flower farm would have a pathway, runway, cover habitat for the wildlife. So this just affirmed and fueled me to create a place for those creatures to be able to come to seek refuge, habitat, water, food, resting places. You know, I went into warp mode, and this snafu of the builder's plans became this beacon of light for me to pursue creating literally a utopia on my little spot of land in the midst of the destruction next door. It is not some manicured garden, y'all. This is like Birdville. It is, you know, if you're an insect around here, you better like watch your back because we just have such the bird and everything that goes with it is just so great here. And so now I just want to, so that's what started all this. And I just can't tell you what an amazing journey it has been. And Steve is just right there with me. And I mean, we do so many crazy things now. I'm going to add this here. I didn't have this in my notes to tell you, but I could tell you about so many things that we've done here on my farm to just help this whole habitat thrive even more. We have gumball trees here, which everybody hates them. You do realize like gumballs provide seed to songbirds. You want to know who a favorite of those are? Chickadees. Anybody that knows what a chickadee is, one of the most precious little birds in the world, they eat the seeds from gumballs. People hate gumballs because they fall, you have to rake them, they hurt your feet, they're annoying, but they feed songbirds. Anyway, our farm had several of those, like over 100 feet tall. And 2 of them on different timing got struck by lightning. And over a couple of 3 years, the tops of the trees started to die. Well, the tree started to die gradually. And they're so tall, you can't leave them. I mean, they'll fall on a building, on a person, on a car. So instead of just having them cut down, we had them cut, the top part cut and left about, I'm going to guess, a 20-foot trunk sticking up in the air. Because do you have any idea? I mean, it is a wildlife mecca right now. So I can see them from my house. There's 2 of them. They're about 20 feet apart. They were done about 2 years apart. Woodpecker City. I mean, so much stuff lives in those dead tree stumps that can't fall on anything and damage. I mean, they can fall, but they're not going to fall and hurt anything. That is, I mean, Steve is like, has to report every night because they're next to his shop where his bikes are and our equipment shed is. And he has to tell me who he saw, from reptiles and birds and insects to possums. And I mean, anyway, y'all, there's just so much that we've done to enhance all of this. And it is really become a big part of our life. So I want to kind of share with you, not steps, but some ideas of what I did to create this first, you know? So first out of the gate, you have to understand, you have to gain an understanding of what native plants do. You know, when somebody introduced the idea to me back when the farm was going to be destroyed, it was one of my master gardener friends said, oh, you should plant some native plants. And I'm like, oh, you know, all I thought was native plants just are easier to grow because they're native to your area, right? That's true, but that is like a BB in the Astrodome, y'all, to what it really means. And it is so much bigger and deeper than that. So that's what you have to understand out of the gate. And they are as beautiful and can be as beautiful as anything else you've ever grown. It's all about how you do it and go about it. So, native birds, for instance, specific species of songbirds that, you know, I'm thinking back to childhood, right? So, specific species of birds that are or were known, meaning you don't see them anymore in your area. So think about some of the birds that you used to see that maybe you don't see anymore. And that happens in areas because they can't survive there anymore. Specific birds eat certain insects, native insects. Native insects live on certain native trees, like we talked about, those things that live on an oak tree. Well, all the birds that eat those insects that we mentioned will be plentiful where those trees grow. And when we stopped planting, or the native flora is removed as development happens, those birds just move on to other areas because there's nothing for them to eat there. I mean, this is just one little example of how this actually happens, right? And when we start planting, and I'll mention him again in a moment, Doug Tallamy, I had the great honor to have dinner with him. We both spoke at a conference. He is like the father of this whole come to know the meaning of native and how much it means to our planet. You know, just opened the door to all of this, that everything is connected. Maybe not every day of every year, but at some point in everything's life, we're all connected to other things. And when we started removing, and he calls them planting alien plants are non-natives. That means plants that come from other countries that we bring them here and plant them. They have no natural predators. None of the native insects will live on them. They don't attract native birds. I'm a birder, so I'm always focusing on birds. But you see what I mean, y'all? It is so deep and so wide. And when the birds that we grew up on no longer, you don't see them, this is the driving force behind it. And so that really became evident to me because, I grew up in a bird watching house. So my parents were not serious birders. They didn't go out with binoculars and all that kind of stuff. My dad was a carpenter. He built platform bird feeders that were right outside of our kitchen window. We had this big tree that had a great crotch right there at window level, and he would build these platform bird feeders. That's just a flat tray bird feeder. And my mom literally would make toast and put jelly on it for some of the species of birds, and put other things out there, fruit and different things. And I grew up at the breakfast bar watching these bird feeders, and we had a bird book. It was like name that bird kind of test, And it wasn't every day, but it just happened. That was just kind of part of growing up. And some of the birds that were plentiful when I was growing up, I just don't see them anymore. The one that I always remember because he loved my mother's jelly toast was the Baltimore Oriole. And things have changed. I have tried putting out toast with jelly, y'all, recreating my childhood, and they're just not here that I've seen anyway. There are enough of them that I get to see them. And the landscape has changed so much that they can't survive in this area and have just moved on, right? And that's how it happens. So planting native plants is about supporting native wildlife and creatures and everything connected to that, right? Native birds eat native insects. Native insects are present on native plants. It's the whole chain of life, and it's so deep. And if you do want to learn more about it, I can't recommend Doug's books enough. Bringing Nature Home is the one that I read first, which truly changed the way that I looked at my farm and why I created what I see now as this halo encompassing my farm. It's because I just got a better understanding of how everything works together for the greater good. And, you'll look at everything different from there on out. So don't read these books unless you're ready to make a change. I mean that wholeheartedly. And planting a 15 to 20 foot wide native border around the perimeter of my property became my number one goal, with my flower farm on the inside of it. And a lot of people ask me, do we cut from the native border? On occasion, but what you'll soon learn is that if you have woodies, shrubs, for instance, if you're not cutting them constantly as a cut, they don't regrow strong, straight stems. So it's not that easy to do that, but it's possible. But we didn't do it much. So what else you really need to know from the get-go is this is not a manicured landscape. So what happened, when we planted the first string of plantings, we mulched those plantings so deeply by bringing home bags of leaves. We picked those up curbside. Listen to the previous episode of Field and Garden if you need to learn about that. And we would pick up the bags, bring them home, and dump them. And they were so deep. I mean, y'all, we're talking 15 to 20 inches. We're trying to recreate like a forest floor, right? And so know that it takes about 3 to 5 years for the plantings to really grow up and really shade out the weeds. And we just know that I look at the border now and it's completely covered in leaf litter for its ground cover, and there are so few weeds. But during that 3 to 5 year period, you're not out there pulling, I mean, you could if you had time, we surely didn't, out there weeding your native border. Native border full of weeds is just more native plant, y'all. I mean, we would occasionally hit some that got a little out of control with a weed eater or something to keep it looking decent for my neighbors. But just know that this is not something you're planting that you're going to be mulching with chips and keeping it weed free. It's not like that at all, because so much stuff lives at the ground level that you need tons of leaf litter and cover for them also. So, for me, I'm not a super neat freak, but I definitely need things orderly to be able to function. So you just have to let it go and do the best you can and just know that's part of it. So the first thing I did was I connected with a local native plant expert for her to know the local flora and the local wildlife and the whole shebang, so that she can help you recreate and know what's available. I was also very realistic of how to do this in stages over years, y'all. It is a really big investment in time, in space, and funding. When a whole nother story, but the neighborhood coming next door is what really pushed me from continuing to be a high production flower farmer, which I love dearly, into the education platform that I am now, because I could not imagine standing out there, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, doing what we needed to do, looking at what was happening next door. I mean, it seemed like it was never going to end. It has ended, but they're still over there, right? And so I knew that it was okay for me to give up some of my growing space, is what I'm getting at. So my border is about 15 feet wide around the majority of my property now, even across part of the front. And I did not mind at all giving up growing space, where in high production, my goodness, my beds went as close to the fences as possible and being able to turn a tractor, right? So what ended up happening is Denise made me a landscape plan. And as she described to me, it was really about a 50-foot snapshot that was repeated multiple times around the property. Some of them got stronger in some things in different areas, but you wanted to create, that's how it works in nature, right? And so that repeat over and over was really easy to recreate, and it has turned out to just be such a great plan. So a challenge that I faced back when we were first starting, so that would have been about 2014, I think, is when we planted perhaps the first leg of what has developed here on my farm. And the challenge was finding native plants that were of decent size, because most nurseries, wholesale nurseries, and even retail nurseries didn't offer a lot of native plantings. You know, that wasn't a thing back then. That's just happened in the last decade, right? So finding native trees and shrubs was a real challenge. And I will say to you, life is short. Invest in the biggest trees and shrubs you can buy. And because, I mean, you can go to some of these native plant sales and they literally have saplings. That is not what I did. So Denise's recommendation, who was, you know, just decades of experience, she recommended getting no bigger than a 15-gallon size tree, which comes in a big pot, because beyond that, you have to have a tree planter machine. I mean, it's just too big to handle. A 15-gallon is a lot for 3 gals to handle, right? Because you just can't handle beyond that. And for shrubs, it was anywhere from 3 to 7 gallons. Some stuff just wasn't available any bigger than 3 gallons. But if they had 7 gallons and I could afford it, I would go that size. So I'm just so happy now. Within 3 years, our trees that were 15 gallons were substantial. And that was because we invested. Just bite the bullet. Pay now or pay later, y'all. It's so much easier to get them to survive. And if you have deer pressure, which we do, I mean, the deer just eat small plants to the ground. But we made out pretty good. And I think that one thing that became really clear to me also during this journey is that you don't need to just say, all right, I'm ripping out all my landscape that's not native and putting in just natives. It's just knowing that moving from here forward, knowing what you know now, you need to make choices when you are doing plantings and replantings with creatures in mind, the wildlife and the insects, and creating a habitat and a home base to the stuff, to Mother Nature, which will take care of your business, y'all. That's what happens here on my farm. Of course, not using pesticides. And then once you start, you slowly add more. So in year 1, we did the longest side of my farm that bordered the development. And that was her first plan. And then like a year or 2 later, I can't quite remember, I'm almost sure it was 2 years later, she then made a similar plan for across the back of the part of my yard that also bordered that neighborhood. See, when we bought that 1.5 acres, it made us jet into that horse boarding farm. And so that's where the houses were built. The rest of my sides already had neighbors that had been there forever, right? So the second or third year, we did the back side to the old pasture, and then we did the back side of my old backyard. We added more there, and she actually changed it up a little bit there. I wanted more evergreens because it was a narrower part of my property. And then we went across I put a southern wax myrtle hedge across the front of my property to really create backdrop. It all worked out so well, y'all. Something I didn't think of with us planting this border. It also created backdrop for imaging and videoing and photography and the places we were moving into, right? Doing books and courses and all that stuff. So currently there's one side of my property between us and a great neighbor who we don't really want to block them out, but we want to create that runway. So we're just kind of stewing on that right now. What can we put in that's low and diverse and just really beautify our property even more, right? So that's kind of currently where we are. And I also want to just highlight, remind everybody that a major piece of owning property with plantings on it, whether you're talking about a landscape, a formal landscape around your house, or a native border planting, is that you have to understand that all plantings need to be edited about every 15 years or so. And that means that stuff is going to get overgrown, get crowded. You know, planting doesn't mean that it's forever, right? Hopefully you plant your trees so that they're spaced far enough apart that they can live, 30 or 40 or 50 years. But frequently stuff is planted so close together that the intention is at 15 years you go in and take out half of what you're planting to make room for stuff to stretch out and look beautiful. And we do that. And fortunately, I've mentioned southern wax myrtles a couple of times. They're a real favorite here because they love our eastern bluebirds, and we have a lot of those, and they were one that we just didn't have any of here 25 years ago. These southern wax myrtles, literally you can cut them down to a stump and they'll regrow. So if they get too big, too tall, overreach in their area, we just buzz them down with a chainsaw and they regrow beautifully. And it's kind of fun way to manage part of your landscape and to make it so it's still beneficial to the environment, for you. It's just so good for your property, your wildlife, your neighbors, and for you to maybe embark on this native plant journey and create a halo around your property, or at least one side or a bed. It doesn't have to, one plant, that's a place to start, y'all. So I hope you'll consider the hidden treasures of native plantings and just reap the benefits that Stevie and I just absolutely love every day on our farm. And my friends, remember to drop in over. You're always welcome at thegardenersworkshop.com. And my friends, until we meet again, ciao.